This morning, a major baggage backlog left hundreds of Virgin Atlantic passengers stranded in the customs area at Orlando International Airport. So here's what happened. Passengers from 3 flights were arriving from the UK and say that they waited more than 4 hours on Saturday night. Because of federal rules, international passengers are not officially considered to have entered the country until both they and their luggage clear customs. Virgin Atlantic says the delay was caused by severe weather. Airport officials say they understand passengers' frustration and are working with the airlines to help prevent similar delays in the future. By the way, all the passengers were eventually reunited with their luggage, but it took a long time. And so joining us this morning is Brandon Blewett. He is a travel expert and author. Brandon, good morning. It's good to see you this morning.
Morning, good to be back.
So let's talk about this particular situation, right? So it had been raining. Do weather events make it harder to retrieve your luggage?
They can, and what I imagine happened is that there was lightning in the area, and what happens when there's lightning is that for the safety of all the ground crew, they have to cease operations until there is not another strike for a certain amount of time. I believe that's 45 minutes or so, but every time there's another lightning strike within that vicinity, the clock restarts.
Okay, so here's the thing though, because these passengers were stuck for 4 hours before they could be reunited with their luggage and then eventually go about their way, right? What are their rights as a passenger, and could these travelers leave the airport in any other kind of way? I mean, what kind of workaround is there here?
It's incredibly frustrating. I understand that with customs, as you said earlier, it doesn't count as entering the country unless you and your bags are both through the process. The interesting thing here is that would apply to someone that refuses to have their bags presented, right? But in the case where the airline or the airport has delayed that process, I think that there should be some kind of documentation exercise where the passengers are allowed to file the delayed baggage claim, exit the airport, and then come back at a later time when they're able to do that. Because after a 9-hour flight and then waiting for 4 hours, that's just that's unconscionable.
You talked about that form that maybe they can fill out to say, okay, my luggage is being detained, I'm going to leave, and then I'll come back. But yes, this is my luggage. I'm going to come back and get it. Is that something that has been done before, or is that something that is being considered in the future so that something like this doesn't happen again?
I think it will be something that's considered in the future. I mean, CBP does have broad authority, right, to make sure that, for the safety of everyone, that, people are entering and then what they're bringing into the country is something that's not hazardous. So I understand the broad authority, but I do think that instead of being completely rigid with these rules, that we should look for workarounds. And I think raising this story and flagging this issue is something that will help passengers in the future.
That's interesting what you said about that fluidity. There should be some fluidity when it comes to a situation like this. And so let's say you're traveling on an international flight. What should you keep in mind when it comes to your jet bags? Because when I see a story like this, it's like, I'm just trying to put everything in carry-on. Moving
you read my mind. There's a reason that I don't check my bags. And one thing that you have to do is, plan every outfit and make sure that you can either roll it up or get some of those compression things, because everyone that had a carry-on bag, they were able to leave customs and go on their merry way. So look, I understand that you can't do that completely, but one other option is to ship certain things to your location. Make sure that you have the return shipment printed and ready to go when you're doing that here in the US, so it's easier to get it back into the country. But those are some other creative options that you can take. But fortunately, these types of incidents are rare. So hopefully this is a lesson learned not only for Virgin Atlantic, but for the airport and maybe more broadly within CBP.
And so 2 things before we go. I want to talk about those compression bags because my sister just went to the Dominican Republic. She used them. She loved them. She was able to get like 3 times as much stuff in one carry-on to go on a week-long trip to the DR. And then the second thing that I wanted to ask you was, is there some kind of compensation that perhaps these travelers can expect?
There is. I don't know that it's going to be something that makes up for the experience that they had. Generally, if you go to the airline's website, look at their policies for either flight delays or delayed baggage, there will be some type of reasonable compensation, and it's going to be reflected in the duration of your delay. So if it's at a certain point in time, it's probably going to be for meals, right? So I don't know how much that helps when you're stuck in customs and there's no restaurant options. After you leave that situation, you probably just want to go to bed. But I would defer to the airline's policy and follow up with them on what they might be able to do.
All right, and compression bags for all moving forward.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.